The sun was a brutal, unforgiving eye in the vast, bleached sky of the Arizona Territory, its heat shimmering in waves above the cracked earth. A solitary figure moved through this furnace, a man named Kaya, whose name meant my elder sister in the tongue of his people, the Chiricahua Apache, but whose presence now spoke only of a solitary warrior. He was returning, not in triumph, but in the quiet, heavy-footed exhaustion of a long campaign. The dust of the trail clung to his deerskin leggings, and the scent of horse, sweat, and desert sage was a perfume etched deep into his being. His heart, a drum that had beaten only for war and survival for many moons, now quickened its rhythm with the complex melody of anticipation and a deep, lingering dread. He was nearing the place he still, against all reason, called home. His mind drifted to Ilara, her face a beacon in his memory of the way her laughter used to dance on the wind, a sound more refreshing than any mountain spring, and the profound darkness of her eyes that held promises of a future built together, away from the constant shadow of conflict. He had left her with a kiss, a seal of his love and a vow to return, a vow he had kept despite the hardships. But another memory, sharp as an obsidian flake, threatened to pierce this hopeful image. The last time he had seen her, a fleeting expression he couldn't name, a shadow of guilt, or was it merely fear for his safety? That had crossed her features before he rode away. He pushed the thought aside, attributing it to the anxieties of parting. The familiar silhouette of the mesas that guarded his village came into view, and he urged his weary horse forward, the animal sensing the proximity of water and rest, its pace quickening as if sharing its rider's burgeoning hope. 2. The village was quieter than he remembered, a stillness that felt wrong, a silence that was not one of peace but of breath being held. The usual chorus of children's playful shouts and the rhythmic chatter of women grinding corn was absent. As Kaya dismounted, his moccasins sinking into the familiar dust, faces appeared in the doorways of the wickiups, but the welcomes were muted. The smiles strained, eyes met his and then skidded away, averted in a manner that spoke volumes more than any shouted accusation. His own family greeted him with a reserve that chilled him more than the winter winds of the high country. It was his younger sister, Sansi, her face pale with a sorrow that seemed too great for her years, who finally drew him aside, her fingers trembling as she clutched his arm. Her words, when they came, were whispered, broken things, each one a small stone dropped into the still pond of his soul, sending out ripples of disbelief. She spoke of a white trapper, a man with hair like straw and eyes the color of a shallow river, who had been trading at the fort and had started coming around the outskirts of their land. She spoke of whispers, of Ilara being seen walking with him, of exchanges that were not for trinkets or goods, but of a more intimate, dangerous nature. The betrayal was not described in graphic detail, but the implication was a poison that spread instantly through Kaya's veins. The foundation of his world, the very reason he fought to survive, crumbled into dust beneath his feet. The image of Ilara's face, once a source of warmth, now became a searing brand of deception. 3. Confrontation was a storm that broke with a terrible, quiet intensity. He found Ilara not in their wickiup, but by the creek where they had first confessed their love, a place now irrevocably tainted. She was kneeling, washing a garment, her movements graceful and familiar, and for a heart-stopping moment, the accusation felt like a monstrous lie. But when she turned and saw him, the truth was laid bare not in his angry stance, but in the devastating collapse of her own expression. The color drained from her face, and in her eyes, he saw not denial, but a flood of shame and terror so profound it was its own confession. He did not need to shout. His voice was low, a gravelly rasp that carried the weight of his shattered spirit. Is it true? The simple question hung in the air between them, a chasm that could never be crossed again. Ilara did not try to lie. Her silence was more damning than any admission. Tears began to trace paths through the dust on her cheeks, but they ignited no pity in him, only a colder, harder fury. She tried to speak, to offer explanations that sounded hollow even to her own ears, words of loneliness, of fear during his long absence, of the trapper's smooth, foreign words that filled a void. To Kaya, each word was another nail in the coffin of their marriage. He turned away from her, the image of her weeping form seared into his mind, and walked back to the village, a man now completely alone. The warrior who had returned home to find his home had vanished. The days that followed were a descent into a cold, dark place. Kaya moved through the routines of life like a ghost. His interactions with his tribesmen clipped and distant. The Council of Elders, acknowledging his status as a proven warrior, offered him a place of honor, but the respect felt empty. Whispers followed him, a mixture of pity and a grim, judgmental satisfaction. The betrayal was not just his personal tragedy, it was a stain on his honor, a topic for quiet, clucking discussion around evening fires. He threw himself into hunting, taking risks that bordered on recklessness, seeking a physical outlet for the emotional turmoil that threatened to consume him. In the solitude of the hunt, with only the stark beauty of the canyonlands for company, his thoughts were a relentless cycle of pain and rage. He envisioned finding the trapper, enacting a vengeance that was both his right and his duty according to the old ways. The fantasy of violence was a sweet, dark poison, a path that promised a clean, brutal resolution. It was the path of his ancestors, the way of the warrior who answers insult with blood. This path was simple, righteous, and it called to the wounded, primal part of his soul. It was a path that required no forgiveness, no complex emotions, it only strength and the will to exact a price for the pain he had endured. Yet another force, quieter but more persistent, began to stir within him. It was the memory not of the betrayal, but of what came before. It was the memory of Ilar's genuine laughter, the way her hand felt in his, the light in her eyes when she looked at him before the shadow of the trapper ever fell upon them. He remembered her courage, her kindness to his family, the way she had stood by him during a previous illness, her care unwavering. He began to see her not as a monolithic betrayer, but as a flawed, frightened woman, a human being who had made a catastrophic mistake in a moment of profound weakness. This understanding did not excuse her action, it complicated it. The clean, sharp line of hatred began to blur. He saw the toll the scandal had taken on her as well. She was now an outcast, living on the fringes of the tribe, her own spirit broken by the consequences of her actions. The easy path of vengeance began to feel not like strength, but like a different kind of weakness, a surrender to the darkest impulses of his heart. The true challenge, the path that required a courage far greater than that needed for battle, began to reveal itself, the path of understanding, and the seemingly impossible notion of forgiveness. The crisis point arrived with the suddenness of a summer lightning strike. A boy from the village came running into the center of the camp, his chest heaving, his words tumbling out in a panicked rush. The trapper, the white man with hair like straw, had not merely passed through. Emboldened, he had returned with 2 companions, and they had been seen on the sacred ground near the burial sites. A profound desecration. Worse, they had encountered Lara near the edge of the woods and, seeing her as an easy target, a woman with no protector, had taken her captive, intending to drag her back to the fort. A cold fury, but one now tempered with a terrifying clarity, settled over Kaya. This was no longer about the past betrayal, it was about the present moment. It was about a woman in mortal danger. The warriors of the village began to gather, their faces set in grim masks, ready for a fight to defend their honor and their land. But as they prepared to give chase, Kaya realized that their motivation was vengeance and territorial pride. His own motivation was something else entirely, something simpler and more profound. He was not riding out to reclaim damaged property or to avenge a personal insult. He was riding out to save Ilara, the woman he had once loved with his entire soul, the mother of his lost future. He was riding out for her, not against the trapper. The chase was a brutal, frantic race against time, a test of endurance and will. Kaya, riding ahead of the main war party, his connection to the land allowing him to follow signs invisible to the others, finally cornered the 3 men in a narrow box canyon. The confrontation was swift and violent. Kaya fought not with the blind rage of a cuckolded husband, but with the focused, lethal precision of a protector. He saw the terror in Ilara's eyes as she was held as a shield by the trapper, the very man for whom she had betrayed everything. In that moment, any last vestige of hatred for her evaporated, replaced by a pure, burning need to see her safe. He dispatched the two companions with an economy of motion that was terrifying to behold, his knife and his rifle extensions of his righteous will. Finally, he stood facing the trapper, the man who was the embodiment of his pain. The man, cowardly now that his numbers were gone, shoved Ilara aside and raised his own weapon. Kaya had a clear shot. He could end it, fulfill the vengeance fantasy that had sustained him through his darkest hours. He looked into the man's frightened eyes. Then his gaze shifted to Ilara, crumpled and weeping on the ground. This was the moment of choice. Killing the man would be justice by one code, but it would also be the final act that bound him forever to the path of hatred. It would be a victory for the betrayal, not for the love that once was. 8. Kaya lowered his rifle. He spoke a single, guttural command in Apache, a word that meant go, but carried the force of a tidal wave. The trapper, stunned by this mercy he could not comprehend, scrambled onto his horse and fled, the sound of his retreat echoing through the canyon. The other Apache warriors arrived then, witnessing the scene, the two dead men, the fleeing trapper, and Kaya walking slowly toward Ilara, not as a conqueror, but as a savior. He knelt beside her, and their eyes met. In her gaze, he saw the absolute devastation of her choices, the profound regret, and a glimmer of the woman she had been. He did not embrace her. He did not speak words of forgiveness. Such things were too vast for this moment. Instead, he reached out, and with a tenderness that shocked every witness, he gently wiped the smear of blood from her cheek with his thumb. It was an act of humanity, of care, that transcended the complex web of betrayal and pain. Then, slowly, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to her forehead in a final, bittersweet kiss. It was not a kiss of reconciliation, nor of passion renewed. It was a kiss of release. It was a farewell to the love they had shared, an acknowledgement of the pain they had caused each other, and a profound choice to end the cycle of vengeance. It was the Apache man's final kiss, a gesture that chose the complicated, painful truth of a love that had been real over the satisfying simplicity of a hatred that would have destroyed them both. He helped her to her feet, and they walked out of the canyon, not toward a shared future, but toward a separate, solitary peace.